Let's turn to exploring the Shema, discussions on the issues of Trinity. We're talking about who or what is the Holy Spirit. We left off in this section where we're looking at these verses that as they apply to the Holy Spirit. We a few weeks back, we looked at the Holy Spirit is called God in the book of Acts. We looked at the Holy Spirit is called Creator. He's recognized as Creator in the book of Job. The Holy Spirit resurrects in the book of Romans, right? He resurrected Yeshua, he brought him back from the dead. The Holy Spirit indwells us in the book of John. The Holy Spirit is everywhere in the book of Psalms. The Holy Spirit is all-knowing in 1 Corinthians. And then we left off, I believe, with the Holy Spirit sanctifies in 1 Peter. We're not really looking at right now this chart that was supplied by Carm. Instead, what we're doing is we're finishing up this commentary by a Christian author, a Trinitarian author, Roberto Pereira. I believe I'm saying his name correctly there. Sounds kind of a Spanish background to me. And he's talking about looking at the Spirit through Paul's writings. And so we're now in this section called Father, Son, and Spirit, three distinct persons. So let me just pick up our reading right here. This writer says, for Paul, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit are distinct beings or persons. And let me just come to a full stop for a moment. In dialoguing with many non-Trinitarian folks, like I do through my YouTube comments on a regular weekly basis, this would be interaction with either Jehovah's Witnesses, Latter-day Saints, aka Mormons, Unitarian Christians, Christadelphian Christians, Iglesia Ni Cristo Christians, Oneness Pentecostal Christians, I think Worldwide Church of God, I think this falls into that camp. I'm just like rattling off the top of my head, but I'll put a little list on the screen in post-production that you can see kind of a more lengthy list of non-Trinitarian Christian groups that are out there. Well, I'm dialoguing with a sort of a representative of a taste smattering of those through my YouTube comments. And I have to remind them over and over again that the way in which God is one is not the same way in which God is three. And that's why we have to remember that God is one what and three who's, like Dr. James White is fond of saying. He's one being known as God. That's the ontological argument for explaining God. He's one what? He's one being that we could apply the generic label God or Elohim to, or even we could use the term Yahweh. The tetragrammaton name can apply across the being known as God. But when we're talking about persons that are distinct in personality and distinct in roles and functions, we're dipping into the category known as economic trinity. So I'll flash something on the screen for you guys to see. Ontological Trinity is one way of interacting with God's identity. That deals with who he is at the essential nature level, right? His essence, his nature, his divinity, things like that. The Greek terms homoousian and perichoresis and things like that. These are all applicable to the ontological argument. That's the ontological Trinity. But at the same time, when we're reading through the Bible, we interact and we deal with God's interactions among mankind, what we call how God is involved in salvation history. And for that, we're going to read about things that God does, roles that God plays, functions that God does on planet Earth and in the universe. And those discussions are going to take the form of what we call economic trinity, the economies of God. And so that's where the three persons comes into view. So don't get confused. The way in which God is one is not the same way in which God is three. He's one what? He's one being, but he's three persons. And those three persons share the same essence. That's how we understand God. So it's common to agree, this author says, with the idea that the Father and the Son are different persons. However, some theologians wonder if the Spirit is really a third person related with the Father and the Son, or if he is only an impersonal power or force operating in association with God or even emanating from him. We bring this discussion up because the somewhat default Unitarian Christian perspective is that if you just read through the Bible, starting with the Old Testament and work your way towards the New, the majority of verses are going to display and demonstrate that God and the Spirit are the same being. They're the same person, if you want to use the word person in a Unitarian context. And so it's not necessary to imagine that there's this third person of the Trinity in Unitarian way of thinking, because over and over in thousands of texts throughout the Old Testament and a good number of them in the New, the Spirit of God is simply another way of saying God himself, or describing God's power as he interacts with mankind, describing God's gracious interaction with mankind, right? The way that we could say it's God's emanation, the emanation of God, right? The way God touches man through his Spirit. God is enthroned in heaven. He's, what we say last week, you have to remember this. The tension that's created by the fact that God is transcendent on one hand and immanent on the other hand. I'll put a little graphic on the screen to describe this as well. Transcendence, when we're talking about God, describes the fact that he's beyond our capacity to understand and reach or interact with. He's far away from us because of his absolute holiness and his mystery, right? The fact that he is very God and we are frail humans. He's transcendent. We can't fully understand him. But at the same time, when God comes close to us and interacts with us through human history and humanity's salvation, then he becomes immanent to us. He becomes approachable and touchable and graspable. Graspable? We can see him and hear him and interact with him, right? He's up close and personal. That's what I mean by immanent. We hold those two truths about God in tension